What's up, everybody? This is Mike with Confused IT. In this video I wanted to show what the installation process for ESXi looks like, VMware ESXi. We're going to be using 7.0.3 as the example, but it's been pretty much the same installation process for a pretty long time now, so not much has changed on that front. If you're installing this in a home lab or something like that, the licensing can be difficult to get because it's kind of expensive. Production licensing for VMware is quite expensive, and then the other side of it is the default 60-day evaluation period is not super long, so having to keep using that is kind of a pain also. And so that's my first, I guess, bit of topic here I want to cover is how you can get licensing for ESXi. Obviously, you can go to VMware's website, you can get an evaluation license that'll last for a little while. That's one way to get the installer also is by creating an account, going in there, picking a version, downloading it. The problem that I face with this is, I don't know if they changed it, but it used to be once you download the evaluation for a certain version of ESXi, you can't get the download again after your trial period expired. So you have to wait until another major release comes out. Like, for example, when 6.7 came out, I got an update, and then I can get an evaluation on that. Then there was no way for me to get an updated ISO until 7.0 came out, something along those lines. So it can be not the easiest experience, I guess. One other way to get a copy of the installer is through this this person's script. It's a really useful script. ESXi Customizer PS, I believe it is. There's a GitHub version on here. I've used it a few times. It's a really great tool for downloading a copy of the installer for ESXi. You can specify versions, which is really helpful. You can also inject drivers. So if you're installing ESXi on some sort of hardware that may not have native drivers in ESXi for it, you can inject some into it, which makes it really helpful in some cases. So that's one other way to get it. Another way to get the copy of the installer for ESXi is if you have an HP server or a Dell server that you're going to be installing ESXi onto, they'll usually have a custom version of ESXi for their own hardware. So in my case, I have an HP DL360. It's an older server. I think it's a Gen 8 or a Gen 7. So HP has a download for ESXi. It only goes up to as long as they support the server for, so the server's kind of old. So I think it only goes up to like 6.0 or 6.5 maybe. So that's one way to get it also if you have access to the downloads for the server you're using and you're using a commercial server. You can maybe find it there. And then the other way that I like to do, like to get my stuff from, which is you have to pay for it, but it's worth it. This VMware user group, I had a coworker tell me about this a couple years ago, and I signed up, and I've been renewing it pretty much every year since. It's really helpful because the free stuff is great, and the general membership, access to a community, all kinds of great stuff. But the paid version is even more awesome. I mean, it is a little pricey, but considering a production VMware license is super expensive, it really is great. So it gives you year-length licensing. Evaluation licenses is obviously not made for production. It's for hands-on training or your home lab, stuff to play with basically. For a year, it's legitimate licensing. They'll give you the installers for everything, and it's not just for ESXi or just vCenter. They say up here 15 plus VMware solutions. I didn't even know there were that many, but it basically covers everything. I mean, I've seen, I think in the portal I can download, there's, what's the desktop version of some of their VMware tools. The VMware Fusion is, I think, for Mac, is the Mac VMware tool. Then there's also VMware Workstation, that was it, I think. They have licensing for that. The There's also licensing for vSAM, there's licensing for vCenter, there's licensing for vRealize, there's licensing for what's the other one? NSX, I think, is their networking solution. There's, a ton of different VMware products in there. So it's really great that you can get a licensing, and then licensing for their product, and then you can use it for the year and not have to worry about having it expire or anything like that. So that's where I get my stuff from. That's where I got my ISO from my lab. It's also where I got the license key for everything. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next step here. Those are different ways you can get the ISO, and this is one way you can get licensing for it without paying for full price production licensing. All right, so the next step here is we're going to create a bootable flash drive, a bootable installer for ESXi. So I have the ISO of my downloads folder for the installer for ESXi. I'm going to use this tool called Rufus. Some people don't like it. I like it a lot. I think it's really easy to use. It's pretty reliable, very lightweight utility. There's some competitors of theirs down here. These are all free tools, I'm pretty sure anyway, but I guess you can call them competitors. This one particularly, the UNet Bootin one, I've heard of, and it's also will work for the same purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and download the portable version, and I have my flash drive connected, so it should show up. Yeah, there we go. So 16 gig flash drive is connected. I'm going to pick my installer ISO for VMware ESXi. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit start. It's going to give me this prompt for the write mode. I'm going to go ahead and pick the recommended option. And then it's going to ask me if I want to wipe the flash drive. I'm going to hit OK. And this will take a couple seconds. It's not a very big installer. I think it's a few hundred megabytes. Okay, so this just finished. And so now we want to go ahead and close this. Now what you would do is you would unplug the flash drive. You would plug it into your whatever hardware you're using, if it's a desktop, or if you have a server of some kind, or something you want to use as a server. You can just plug it in, make sure it's set to boot to that flash drive. The other thing you're going to want to have connected is your installation destination, wherever you want the ESXi OS to reside on. Unlike installing Windows or a Linux VM, or Linux OS or anything like that, in this case you're going to want to use something small like another flash drive, or if you're using a server that happens to have an onboard SD card slot, you could use an SD card. So flash drives are usually the easiest thing. So you're going to have your installation flash drive, and then also a flash drive where the installer will put the ESXi OS. It's very small. Like I said, a few hundred megabytes. It grows to maybe a couple gigs if you use really, vSAN and some really other big VMware technologies. But nothing doesn't need a whole hard drive. It doesn't need a lot of space. So save your hard drives and your SSDs and everything for data storage, not so much the host OS. So in this case, I'm going to use a VM to boot up and show you the installer process, because that's probably easier than me trying to hold a camera in front of a monitor and you try and seeing it through. That can get really kind of dicey. So I'm going to just cover this in a VM format. Yes, you can install ESXi on ESXi. I'm sure it's not recommended, but it is possible. And it probably doesn't run great when you try and virtualized VMs, or I guess Inception VMs, or nested virtualization, whatever you want to call it. So just using this to show the installation process. So towards the end here, right here, it usually hangs for a while. Occasionally people think it's broken, but it really just takes forever to get to the next step. Same thing with booting. It's practically the exact same spot it'll get stuck at. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this video, and I'll resume it once it moves on to the next step. All right, so we just made it on to the next screen. Yeah, this is the first area where you kind of have a choice of, I guess, canceling or continuing. This just talks about compatibility. Obviously, if you install this on a desktop or some consumer grade hardware, it's not really VMware compatible, or totally compatible, I guess, how you want to word it. If you're using a server, it still may only be partially compatible depending on which version of ESXi you're using. So we're going to hit continue here, but just take that into account. You may go through this installation process if you use some consumer grade desktop or something like that as your ESXi host. Then for some reason the network may not show up because you don't have the right driver, or it's not a compatible VMware solution, stuff like that. So I'm going to hit continue. At this point, it's going to go ahead and scan for all the devices that are connected. You'll usually see, obviously, all the disks that are connected. You're going to see the flash drive that the installer is booted off of right now, and you should also see your other flash drive, the one that you're going to use for the actual ESXi OS, where the installer is going to put the OS onto. So this is where you would pick that other flash drive, the one without the installer on it. And then you're going to pick your keyboard layout. This is US default for me. So here you want to pick a root password. It's important that you don't forget it. You can change it later. And if you totally forget it, I think there's a way to reset it through the actual files on the ESXi host OS flash drive that you'll have. You can modify, I think, a couple files and maybe reset the root password. I don't know if that's still possible, but it used to be. Anyway, don't forget it. Let me set one here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And yes, so it's going to warn me that the CPU on this server is, it's actually a desktop that I'm running for this example. It's an older, I think it's a 4th gen Intel chip. So you'll get this warning often. At a certain point, VMware will stop supporting certain CPUs. And so if you have a device that you're trying to use and it doesn't support it, the CPU particularly, you can try an older version of ESXi. For example, the servers I have in my lab are HP DL360 1U servers. They're kind of old. They're Gen 7 or Gen 8. I think they're on like Gen 11 or 12 or something now. So they're a lot. They're pretty out of date. So they only support up to ESXi 6.5. I can't go any further than that. So if you're trying to use an older piece of hardware, just get an older version of ESXi and it should work. There are, I think 6.5 is not considered EOL yet. Not 100% sure on that, but I know 6.7 is not, and they have different levels of compatibility with 7.0. So just figure out which one will work with your hardware and then use that one. I'm going to hit continue here. This is just going to tell us that it's going to install ESXi onto, and that MPX VMHBA address is the flash drive we picked earlier. So I'm going to hit F11. And then this can take, depending on how fast your flash drive is, the one that you're installing onto, it could take some time. Sometimes it'll get stuck at 5% for a while. This one seems to be going pretty quick because it's a VM and we're installing it to an SSD, so I'm sure it'll be relatively quick. I'll pause it and then I'll resume the video anyway, so we don't have to wait for this thing to finish. Alright, so just finished. This is the installation complete screen. It's going to show us that we're in evaluation mode for 60 days. If you have a license from VMUG or you have another legit license from somewhere, you can just pop the license in once you're in the web interface for ESXi. So for now, we're going to just go ahead and remove the installation media and reboot. For you, it's just unplugging the USB drive. I'm going to do the virtual equivalent here, which is to just remove the CD drive that has the ISO on it. So that's done. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter, and it'll reboot. The boot screens, I guess you can call them, look the same when you're using the VMware installer or the ESXi installer, or you're booting off of the actual host OS. So they look pretty much identical. They get stuck at the same spots. It can get a little confusing if you're trying to figure out which one you just booted off of. So definitely remove the flash drive. It'll save you some headache later. I'm going to pause the video again here, and I'll resume it once it's done booting up, because it can take a few minutes to boot up. Alright, so just finished booting up. This screen is going to tell you where your what address your host has. So in this case, it got a DHCP address of 192.168.1.202. So I'm going to open up a new tab, and I'm going to go to that address. And there's the SSL cert is not valid. That's pretty typical. Going to hit continue. And here we're going to type in that root account that we made earlier. All right, so now we're in the ESXi Web Interface. This is pretty much it. This is where so you get the 60-day evaluation period. The next important step that I'm going to cover, but I'm not going to really cover too much else beyond it. I'll make another video on, I guess, how to really set up ESXi and how to create VMs and everything. But in this case, one important step that you don't want to miss out on is setting a static address for your ESXi host. It's pretty hard to, it's pretty easy to lose this thing if you reboot and the IP changes and where to go and all that type of stuff. So there are two ways to set the static IP, or set the network information configuration on ESXi. There's one way, which is through the console, which I'll show here. You just hit F2 and then you put in that root password again. This is also where you would go if for some reason you didn't have a network address available because your network didn't have DHCP or something like that on it. You can come in here and static an address in, and hopefully you'll be able to get connected to your host. So you go over to Configure Management Network, and then you go under IPv4 configuration. One other thing you can check here is if you go into here in network adapters, you can see if it recognizes your network device. So this could be one way of troubleshooting if for some reason you boot up and you don't have an address and you can't get an address. It's possible that, like I said before, that there might be a compatibility issue with your network card or whatever the network is on. In that case, you just have to install the right driver, and then it should show up in this list. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to IPv4 configuration. Here you can choose a static address, and you can just put in the address that you want to static it to. Obviously the gateway, the subnet mask. Just for the example here, I'll set it to the same thing it is right now. So let's hit enter. And then down here you can set your DNS configuration, your host name. You could also configure your DNS suffix. So once that's done, you're going to hit escape one more time off this screen, and it's going to prompt you to save those settings, which can cause a brief network outage. So yeah, I'm going to apply changes, restart management network. We're going to hit yes, and we'll do that. And then now we're on the previous screen, and so it should be statically set now to that same address that it got from DHCP. This is through the console method. From here, you can do a whole bunch of stuff. You can obviously change your root password. You can do some troubleshooting. Through the UI, if you go under networking on the left, you go under TCP IP stacks, and you go under the default one, you can edit it, and here's where you can set your host name, your domain name, your DNS servers, your search domains, your gateway, all that important stuff. And then on the next tab over, under VM kernel NICs, just pick the default one that was created, which is your management network address. Under the IPv4 settings, this would be DHCP, but we already configured it statically on from the console, so this is already static, but this is where you would set it also from here, and you hit OK or save, and it would make those changes happen as well. So that's pretty much it. The next steps beyond that would be setting up your storage, your data stores, creating some VM, setting your log directory, doing all that fun stuff. This is the end of this video. Hopefully you found it helpful. Yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Our website has some resources that you might find useful as well. Confused IT is a non-for-profit organization ran by IT professionals. Our mission is to make IT knowledge more accessible and easier to digest. Thanks for watching.